Hey everyone, Scott here to discuss The Bikeriders, starring Jodie Comer, Austin Butler, Michael Shannon, Mike Feist, Boyd Holbrook, Norman Reedus, and Tom Hardy, directed by Jeff Nichols. Now, before I go into this, I remember because I saw this movie twice. The first time I saw it was it was like around 20 people and there was some bike riders in the theater itself without the motorcycles, but they were here to support a movie that was about their style. And the second time I remember going, and that was like 65, and there were some more than others that were bike riders, but will it fit them? Let's get into it and let's find out. The movie takes place in the years of 1965 to 1973, as we start with a couple of assholes harassing Benny, played by Austin Butler, welcome back, sir, to take off his jacket, and he refuses as they beat the living shit out of him, while Benny puts a cut on one of their faces, and we move on to Kathy, played by Jodie Comer, in an interview in the year 1965, where she's getting interviewed by a reporter of some kind. I never got the guy's name off the top of my head, so forgive me if I didn't get that piece of information down. And she goes in a bar where she's being hit on by a bunch of bike riders while out with a girlfriend who has a boyfriend named Cockroach, and they dance as she has the eyes for Benny while at the pool table, and she sticks around and wants to know more about Benny until he comes up and introduces himself, and he steps away after saying she wants to go home. And the president of the biker gang called the Vandals, Johnny, played by Tom Hardy, comes up to Kathy and says, "Don't worry about nothing," as the Vandals go outside and Kathy rides along with Benny. And I do like the characters, and the performances are very good in this movie, as the cinematography is great throughout the movie. The Vandals and Kathy arrive at a different bar, and she sticks there and gets dropped off at 4 a.m. while Kathy's boyfriend is jealous about it, and Benny stays out of front of Kathy's house to the next day, which can be aggressive, as she warns him about being outside until Kathy's boyfriend comes home from work, and he leaves her in good riddance, because that motherfucker seems like a real asshole to Kathy to begin with, while he was aggressive when she got home at 4 a.m. to begin with. And because of Benny being at the front, he takes her to a biker meeting, and then 5 weeks later they get married, which reminded me of Frozen, where she married a guy she just met after 5 weeks instead of one day. Like, they barely know each other, while Benny breaks 18 different traffic laws and runs through 7 traffic lights until eventually runs out of gasoline and gets arrested by a bunch of cops, and he has no choice but to go to court, and he doesn't give a shit that chances are he never went, as it was never said. And I really like the writing in this movie, as it's said terrifically by the actors director Jeff Nichols hired for their roles. We learn more about Johnny and his wife Betty, as he has a couple of daughters, as well as he started the biker gang, starting with a racing club. And we learn about the other bikers like Corky, Wahoo, Brucey, Cal from California, played by Boyd Holbrook, whom I know from Logan. And it took me my second viewing to realize it was him, while he was unrecognizable. Zipco, played by Michael Shannon, he was one I recognized because he was in so many of this director's movies, and others as he appeared out of the fucking blue. And Kathy talks about Big Fat Jack, as I'm going to call him, challenging Johnny to bring his friends from Milwaukee to the Vandals because Johnny said no. And how that works is Johnny picks the challenge as fists or knives, as Jack wants to pick fists because he doesn't want to kill him. And they settle in the picnic, and Johnny ends up winning by breaking Jack's finger and says, "Bring your friends from Milwaukee," because Johnny says so. And the Vandals got big really fast, as we see the kid, whom the audience will meet more later in the movie, trying to break into a car and scares someone honking at him and breaking his car. And that is one mean motherfucker. And I'll explain why later in the movie, but I like the Vandals, as these guys are entertaining to watch from start to finish. The Vandals arrive at a car show at a stadium of some kind, and we'll get some dialogue by Zipko about Pinko, which means a college boy, as he describes his brother that way, as his brother went to school and went to the military, and a tall Vandal is picked on by an asshole named Gary Rhodes, who puts a whom this tall guy put a scratch on Gary's bike, and Johnny tried to chat with him until, out of the blue, Benny beats the shit out of Gary as he punches the window and has glass on his hand for accidentally punching the window of the car. And I remember audiences in the second viewing were going like, ooh, because they had that glass in his fist like that. And Benny is one crazy motherfucker, and at the end of it, Johnny talks with Benny about what the fuck happened out there, and we go back and forth between the story and the interviews with Kathy, and I know the interviews should be at the end, but it works to tell the story of the movie, which is nicely edited. Editing choice, I'll say, and the editing is pretty good in my opinion. We go back to the opening scene where Benny cuts the face of one of the brothers and gets his leg broken, and Benny gets hospitalized and it almost gets cut off as he explains he can't ride a bike until his foot gets better. And this movie is violent, as another example comes to mind of the Vandals coming to the bar where Benny gets his foot wounded by the two brothers. Excuse me. As Johnny is having a word with the owner of the bar, and Johnny gets an address of the brothers and burns the bar down, and nobody is doing a damn thing about it, not even the cops, the paramedics, and the firefighters, and they're afraid of the Vandals at this point. And as they get too powerful, and the bar burning down by the fire is a great shot, as director Jeff Nichols does a fantastic job at making these shots terrific. While the next day comes, Johnny comes to the hotel room where Benny is staying at and tells him they burned the bar and killed the two brothers that harassed him in the bar, while off screen, I'll say, while Kathy stays with Benny watching the TV, and Johnny invites Benny to a get-together with the Vandals, and after Johnny leaves, Kathy brings up how she's afraid for Benny while riding the bike, and he threatens to leave, and that felt heartbreaking, as there were times the movie was heartbreaking. Kathy goes to the bar where the Vandals hang out at, and has a chat with Johnny about taking Benny off the Vandals, and tells him he can't have him anymore, as she's worried about Benny's. And I believe that based on the performance from Jodie Comer, while the kid's father hits his mother with a belt and the kid hits him with the belt back, and his mother throws a dish at the kid and leaves his folks' place and decides to talk to Johnny about joining the Vandals. And we get introduced to Funny Sonny, played by The Walking Dead's Norman Reedus, as he joins the Vandals, and he scares the living hell out of people. And he looks like a biker in general, so he was perfect for a role in this movie. While the subplot about the kid is my least favorite part of the movie, in my opinion. Johnny asks Benny if he gets killed to take over the Vandals, and why Benny, because he knows Benny doesn't take shit from the village assholes, and the acting by Austin Butler and Tom Hardy was great in this movie, as the best characters are them, as they stole the show from the star of the movie, who happens to be Jodie Comer. But don't get me wrong, she's great in this movie, as well as we get back to her interview and Kathy talks about how Benny says he'll leave, as he doesn't mean it at all, because Benny loves her in general, as we get Brucey getting ran over by a car and gets hospitalized and dies, and Johnny wants to send flowers to his funeral, and they go to Brucey's funeral, and his parents dismiss them by his mother spitting on Johnny's face, while the father tells him to get out of here, which is once again very heartbreaking because he was like family to him, as well as the Vandals. The kid comes up to Johnny and asks him if he can be a part of the Vandals, but Johnny says no because he's just a kid, despite he's only 20 years old based on what he says. And the kid still shows the bike anyways, and Johnny says get rid of his friends, and he does, but the kid gets rejected anyways and beats him up after pulling a knife on Johnny and tells him to get the fuck out of here, as he's obviously too young to join the Vandals. to begin with, and it serves him right. And we move on to Cockroach saying he's going to quit the Vandals to become a motorcycle cop and gets beat up by some other guys while they have a party with the other bike riders. And Kathy sees a woman with a red dress and admires that dress, while Benny goes with Johnny and a couple of others to check up on Cockroach. And they take him to the hospital, and a couple of other bike riders almost rape Kathy until Johnny saves her life. And I did like the editing in this scene as well as the way it was shot, as it works great. Cockroach approaches Johnny and talks with him about who attacked him, as well as he quits the Vandals, and Johnny says he'll take care of Cockroach, and he asks Benny if he has a pistol, as Johnny plans on using it for Cockroach. And I get the impression this is a mob group, while Kathy asks Benny to not ride his bike anymore, as well as quit the Vandals. And she brings up how Benny wasn't there to save her life in the previous scene. And the argument is done as Benny leaves the house and meets with Johnny. And I felt so bad for Kathy at this point in the film, as I cared for the characters, and I'll explain why in the next segment. Johnny and Benny break into Cockroach's house and shoots him in the leg and says, "Get out of here," and stay gone. And they get back to their local bar, and Benny asks Johnny, "Is that what we are now, like mobsters at Cockroach's house?" And Benny decides to leave and gets out of town after Johnny says the new guys don't listen, and also he says he can't run this club anymore as he needs Benny. And Benny says it's not him and it's never going to be him, while he gets the hell out of town. And he was gone for a year and a half, while the kid challenges Johnny with knives because the other guys are done with how Johnny is running things. And Johnny says, "Meet me in a parking lot by the lake the next night." And it comes as Johnny stops by Kathy's house to just check up on her. And at the end of that scene, he says, "Take it easy." And I'm like, is Johnny running a mob now? Like he's Marcellus Wallace from Pulp Fiction? And that's an interesting comparison to another mob movie. But to be fair, I like these guys just like as much as I like Pulp Fiction. Johnny gets to the parking lot by the lake, and the kid doesn't bring a knife, but shoots him dead with a pistol. And the kid becomes the leader of the Vandals, while the other Vandals are sitting in their cars silently as they watch the kid run things now, as they grow bigger and bigger and become a proper gang, as they learn what happened to the characters after the kid takes over the Vandals. And Benny hears about Johnny's death while in Indiana, and he comes back to Kathy's porch and sees him, and she sees him crying. As she brought up earlier in the movie, she's never seen Benny cry before, as he never had until he gets to the porch, and she sees him crying for Johnny. And we hear Kathy saying they moved to Florida after hearing about Johnny's death. Benny doesn't ride his bike anymore, and she says he doesn't miss it, and he works for his cousin. And the climax was very well done as to a movie I really enjoyed sitting through from start to finish. Now it's time for my rating. I'll give this movie a 8.0 out of 10. I do like the characters as they say their lines terrifically, as the actors chosen for their roles do a great job with their roles, while they're entertaining to watch from start to finish, and the cinematography is very good in this movie from start to finish as well. The editing is pretty good in this movie, as the shots being shot by director Jeff Nichols are terrific, and there were times the movie was heartbreaking, and that's how much I care for the characters at the end of the day. The subplot for the kid was probably the weakest thing about the movie, in my opinion, as this movie is smartly written, and this is a solid recommendation. And Austin Butler, 3 for 3 after Elvis and Dune Part 2, as he is a very good actor, while I knew him first from Quentin Tarantino's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. And Tom Hardy, who's also a very good actor, in my opinion, is good in this movie as well. But at the end of the day, in my opinion, go see this movie, as it's so far director Jeff Nichols' second best movie, in my opinion, as his very best is Mud. So I'd like to thank you guys for joining me, and whenever we get to when Jeff Nichols decides to make another movie, right on down.